Hi and welcome to Happy Kitty Kitchen. Before beginning with the recipe, I want to elaborate that I repeat this dish twice in the video, and in both times I made several mistakes, but I still chose to make and share this video because I figure it's still heavenly and must be shared, and I also want people to see my mistakes so that they can learn for themselves and avoid making the same mistakes. Onto the video, I'm starting with making the sourdough crust recipe I got from Daily Sourdough channel on YouTube, which I'm linking in the description box because her videos on sourdough are fantastic. If you don't have sourdough starter, you can make a regular quiche crust and skip this part. I have a recipe for one in the description box and in the link in the video. But this video is mainly about the filling itself because it is absolutely sinfully delicious and rich in flavors. I measure out 1 cup of sourdough starter that has been fed 6 to 8 hours earlier and already doubled in size, so it's ready for use. Then I add in 2 cups of all-purpose flour. I'm going to set 1 cup aside to add later, then 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 tablespoon of sugar. Then I add in the cold butter, which I should have cubed earlier, but I was too lazy and I cubed while it was in the bowl, and the remaining flour, and then I start mixing. Now you could do the step using a stand mixer, but I chose to do a little arm workout and do it by hand. I mix everything by hand until it is well incorporated and it forms a beautiful semi-firm ball that doesn't stick to your hands, and you can leave it then. Leave it to rest overnight in the fridge. The next day I start with the filling, which is caramelized onions first because that takes the longest time, so I'll be doing that first. And I've temporarily split them into 2 separate pans with a generous amount of olive oil just so I can caramelize them faster and get a head start. This step is going to take a minimum of 45 minutes to an hour, maybe even longer. It all depends on your stovetop and your pan and your technique. Now when the onions have wilted down quite a bit, I'm going to add them to the other pan and start sauteing my mushrooms in this pan. I add in some minced garlic, about a teaspoon, I would say. I add salt, pepper, thyme, and oregano, and a nice dollop of butter that's about a heaped teaspoon's worth. I give them all a good mix, make sure to spread the seasoning around and coat the mushrooms and melt the butter. I've added in some oil from the onion pan into the mushrooms because it was looking a bit low on oil, and then I keep on stirring. Once the mushrooms have browned a bit, I'm adding in the leeks and mixing everything up. Here I strained out some of the oil of the onions because I realized I had put in too much and I don't want to fry the onions. So I continue to saute the onions on a higher heat, like medium-high, but mixing non-stop. I added in a bit of water in the middle of the pan just to deglaze those brown bits at the bottom and to keep anything from burning or crisping up. For the mushroom and leeks pan, I add in heavy cream because I want the cream to simmer in those flavors and really retain those herbs and seasonings. And I think I put it in a cup's worth or half a cup. It doesn't matter because at the end of the day, I am also going to reduce the heavy cream while it simmers. I also have some frozen homemade vegetable stock, which I thought is perfect to add into this and give it a bit more depth and flavor. There are some seasonings in my vegetable stock already, so it saves me the need to add more seasonings to the mix. There's a hint of cinnamon and nutmeg in there, along with more oregano and thyme. If you feel like your mushroom mix is lacking in flavor, you can always add your own preferred seasonings to it and use chicken stock if you don't have vegetable stock. After tasting the mushroom mix, I decided to add in a bit more salt and pepper, thyme and oregano because I also know that there will be other ingredients coming into this. It will get a bit more diluted later on. I know I repeat this a lot during all my videos, but always taste your own food, taste as you go. I'm adding in a handful of shredded Emmental cheese or Parmesan if you don't have that. Now caramelizing the onions, Takes a really long time and you have to be really patient, but the good thing is you can always make it a day before and keep it in the fridge to cut down on making too many steps in one day. The same with the mushroom mix, you can always make it a day before. There are several different ways to make the caramelized onions, but this is how I do it. I like watering it down and deglazing, then watering it down and deglazing. Every so often, I feel like that makes the onions less oily and a bit more jammy and soft. I tried to speed up and cut some footage out of the caramelizing process because it took me about an hour and 40 minutes to complete, but I also wanted to show how long the process does take. After I give it a taste, I also end up adding a bit of brown sugar just to sprinkle to add a touch more sweetness to it before I put it in a strainer so that it can drip off any excess liquids that I don't want. I took my dough out of the fridge and set it aside, and I'm going to start on the cream and egg mix. This is what will help the quiche set and firm and stay firm and solid. I'm adding in about a quarter or third cup of heavy cream. Make sure to season that with the same seasonings we used in the mushroom mix, which is salt, oregano, pepper, thyme. And then I'm adding in about 1.5 cups of full fat milk. In another bowl, I have 4 small eggs that I cracked and whisked, which I'm also going to add in. The reason I use a separate bowl to crack the eggs in is in case there are any shells that fall into that bowl, it's easier for me to remove. But if any shells fall into the cream mix bowl, I will not be able to see them because everything is almost white. This mixture is enough to make 1 large quiche and 1 small quiche. So if you aren't planning on making another quiche, decrease this mix by 1.5 cups and remove 2 eggs. But for me, I like to make a savory French toast with my leftover mixture or make a mini quiche to keep in the freezer. Now I have my dough to deal with, which is still cold. Flattening it out was a bit of a pain in the beginning, but I got there eventually. Had to get rid of the mat because it was just making things more difficult, and realized that working it by hand is much easier for me. As you can tell, I am not a professional in rolling out dough, but eventually I got there. It was actually very fun. It's like shaping Play-Doh, so I would recommend highly. Once I roll it wide enough to fit in my dish, I place it in there and press it to the dish, creating crimps with my fingers, which is not very sophisticated, but it works. Poke holes in the bottom using a fork to avoid getting unbaked spots and to keep it from rising too much while baking. Then I pop it into the oven to blind bake, which means to bake it a bit before baking it fully with the mixture inside it. I made a mistake here, which you will later see. Anyway, I last minute decided to add some frozen spinach to the mushroom mixture because I wanted to add nutritional value and we had too much spinach in the freezer. So the spinach isn't really going to change the flavors at all, it's just going to give it more texture and color. Now, I've never really made a sourdough crust before, and I'm still a sourdough beginner, so I was a bit alarmed when I saw that the center had puffed up this much. I started to press the center back down, as you can see, and in an attempt to do damage control, I thought I would put some weights on top of the crust so I can keep it from rising too much. Then I put it back in the oven because it seemed a bit too soft still. And I don't want the center to be raw dough by the time the quiche is done. So after 5 to 7 more minutes, or when I saw that the top of the crusts were browning, I took it out, only to realize I did a bit of an oopsie. The self-made weights were very messy, and I ended up having to pick out dried beans from the bottom of the pie. After successfully picking off any scattered beans, I added a light layer of mozzarella or Emmental cheese at the bottom of the crust. Then I'm adding in the caramelized onions, but I started to spread them, then I stopped because I later learned that someone who would be eating this doesn't want any caramelized onions. So that was that. So I left them aside for the other quiche that I was going to make. I add in the filling and the cream mix, add some cheddar cheese and a bit more mozzarella, then I popped it back into the oven. Again, I made a mistake here and cut into the quiche while it was hot. Never do that. It was wrong. Always wait for it to cool down and harden. However, the flavor was out of this world. Even the crust was just so scrumptious and soft and biscuity and fluffy. It was consumed immediately with nothing left. But I was just so unhappy with the presentation that I decided to make it a second time and try different techniques. And I read up on certain techniques that restaurants make their pie crust by cooking it on the bottom of the dish instead of inside the dish. So I decided to try that out and show you guys. Of course, I had to add in another heavy pie dish on top just to keep the dough from rising in the center and puffing up too much. And also just to keep its structure. But I made a mistake here again. I didn't grease the dishes so the dough won't stick. And I pulled the edges of the crust just too downwards and they started cracking. Anyway, in this one, I put in all the caramelized onions at the bottom and mix the mushroom mix with the liquid before putting it into the pie, into the quiche. Basically, I might have messed up the crust again, but at least the assembly wasn't as bad as the first time. I also waited for it to cool down, then I cut into it. As you can see, it held its shape perfectly this time. And again, it was so plate looking good that it was gone in a day. So the first quiche I made had a fluffier, more buttery crust with a really good filling. But the second quiche, although the center was kept flattened, the edges were a bit too cooked. It was more on the flaky, crumbly side, but the filling was marvelous, better than the first ones. So what I learned from all of this is if I'm going to use the second technique of upside down, I should not handle the crust roughly, especially when it's warm and delicate. It's better to let it cool off while it's upside down before flipping and filling it. And if I were to use the first method, I need better weights because that aluminum and black-eyed peas isn't it. Also, I learned never to cut into the quiche while it's hot. Everything will just ooze and fall apart. But anyway, if you've made it this far, as usual, thank you for watching and have a great day from Happy Kitty Kitchen. Bye.